Eric, it is so great to have you with us. Eric Engelmann, got the last name right, is a partner at Novy, the healthcare software venture studio we're going to be talking about, and general partner at ISA Ventures, a $22 million fund focused on Iowa-based technology companies. He's also board chair of, I love this name, the New Bohemian Innovation Collective. No, what do you have an acronym for it?
Yeah, NUBOCO, because it's a mouthful.
Thank you. Yeah. And manager of the Iowa Startup Collaborative Fund One. Eric has launched companies in the healthcare, software, nonprofit, and investment areas. Organizations he founded include Geonetric, a web development shop, the New Bohemian Innovation Collective, the Iowa Startup Accelerator, and ISA Ventures. Eric has an undergraduate degree in economics from University of Iowa. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Excited to be here. I pulled together a slide deck, so I'll quick share my screen
Oh,
if
I
that's
didn't know that.
okay. Yeah, yeah.
You're full of surprises. Thank you.
Always. Whoops. Let's try this. Bam. All right. Is that working?
Yes, we're good. And if you have questions, kind of think of them, and hopefully we'll have time to ask a few questions.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. The organization's called Novy. Novy is a Czech word for new because Cedar Rapids, Iowa, where we're located, has a big Czech population. And that's where the New Bohemia name comes from as well. The neighborhood that we're in is called New Bohemia. I'm not personally of Czech descent, but we have a lot of heritage in our community from that. So that's how that came to be. The Novy is a venture studio, and it's not necessarily a new concept. There are hundreds of them around the world, but not that many around the Midwest. Victor mentioned High Alpha, which is probably the canonical example of this, but there's a bunch of them all around the world. But it's a sort of like a venture fund in some ways. But what it's really doing is forming companies at the very beginning and then building them, providing capital and experienced talent from day one. I've been an entrepreneur. I've built my own company. It's a lonely job. You're figuring it out often as you go, certainly if you're a first timer. Capital is, especially in the Midwest, tends to be, sometimes challenging to come by, especially early on when you're just getting started. So what we're trying to do here was, it's a purely economic play. This is a model that from an investment perspective is interesting. But I think for founders, it also fits a very specific profile of a startup founder that needs a certain set of resources. It's different from a venture fund. It's different from an accelerator, not necessarily better or worse, just providing a different combination of resources. So I run a venture fund. That's kind of my day job. And, there are pros and cons to each of them. A venture studio is usually starting earlier than any venture fund would ever get involved. It's often at the very beginning when it's not much more than an idea. And I know there's a lot of university folks on this call today who have, technology maybe locked up somewhere in the tech transfer office trying to figure out what to do with it. In some cases, a venture studio might be an option, for example, because it's starting at that very beginning place. Takes a little bit of a different ownership stake in the companies, usually a larger ownership stake, but the majority or perhaps all of our ownership is common. So we are winning only when the founder wins. So it's a little bit of a different financial model. We provide a full-time experienced team. I'll speak more about that in a moment. We get deeply involved in governance the whole time. It's providing, at least for the Midwest, a lot of capital very early in the life cycle of a company. We're really focused on one industry, which is healthcare. And we do many fewer companies. Most venture funds are, generally categorized in one or more industries. Certainly our other venture fund cuts across many industries. That gives us some advantages and some concentration risk as well. We also invest at the highest risk position. Like it's literally the earliest possible point generally you can invest. Most venture funds are investing later, so lower risk probably on average. Venture funds are also typically locked into a certain life cycle. They have a 10-year window, and so as things get further along, for the most part, 10 years, as they get further along, their propensity for investing in early stage companies tends to change, whereas Novy doesn't have that limitation. It can basically build a company and stick around indefinitely, as long or short as it may take to build that company. So it's got some commonality with venture funds, but it's also meant to be a little bit different from an investment perspective. As I mentioned, we're focused on healthcare. So it's basically digital health. I know a lot of the folks in this call are probably life sciences related or health related. So not everything in healthcare fits for what we're doing. But this is the background of our team. The company that I built was a software company for hospitals. I sold into hospitals all across the country. That's sort of my background. My business partners also have experience there, and the team that we've hired has gobs of experience building software in the healthcare space. Our model is a little bit different. Essentially, this is where it kind of looks like a fund. We co-found the companies early on, typically a minority ownership stake, but usually much larger than a venture fund would take because we're investing earlier. In some cases, we might be a majority owner depending on the company. So an example there might be something like a professor with intellectual property. They never want to leave their job. They're trying to figure out what to do with that intellectual property. Maybe we own 60%, 80% of the company at the beginning, and then over time we all get diluted. Depends on the situation and how much involvement they're bringing and how much has been invested. But it's very different from how most venture funds would approach that or even look at that. And then in some cases, it might be where we just start a company because that's our experience. We don't anticipate doing that for a while yet. But eventually that's probably where some of this winds up as we build out our network, and then we bring in a CEO once we've validated the idea and done all of the market analysis and research to make sure it's a really good idea. The process is not particularly novel insofar as the way it's worded here, but I think what I want to communicate is the first two boxes are essentially before a company is even created. How do you take it from idea to knowing if it's a good venture scalable idea? And an accelerator often does that, or at least is participating in that process. Or this is the lonely job of a founder trying to figure it out, usually with friends and family money. For the most part, is typically how they're doing that. They're trying to figure it out, and they're often doing it for the first time. We've run an accelerator program for almost a decade, and we know the strengths and weaknesses of that model. What we were doing there is teaching someone else how to do that work for the first time. And, that may not be the CEO's skill set to do that kind of market research and analysis. So in Novy's case, we do that for you. That's part of our process to evaluate the idea before even selected. So we have experts who that's what they do all day, is figure out, is this a good idea? Is there a lot of money to be made here? Is it a market need that needs to be solved that people will pay for? And how do we know that with definitive data? It's interesting that there's not that many ways to do that that are experienced ways to do that. So we basically do that. And then once we decide to form the company, the model is intense. We have the resources just to pour onto the companies that we create. And the goal would be to try to run a cycle like that in about 5 years on average, which is much faster than typical. And the hypothesis behind that and the data that's the venture studio industry has generated showing that's possible, that happens because you're often avoiding the mistakes that early founders make. They don't have to figure stuff out for the first time. We've got a lot of that stuff already set up and ready to go. So it's a really cool model for maybe deeply accelerating certain companies for this kind of profile. The general offering looks like this. We'll do about one company a year. So very low volume and a very small population of companies. But we're investing $1 million more or less at or near the company formation. So very, very early. Novy's core team, again, that's our experiences in healthcare software, both from founding companies, operating companies, marketing and operational aspects, and investors. We'll also be paying for 2 full-time executives to join the company for at least 2 years, and could be indefinitely, but there's certainly the goal would be to surround whoever our co-founder is with the skills that they're lacking. So if that's a CTO or maybe even the CEO of the company, that's part of what we're bringing in addition to that $1 million direct cash. We're also going to bring those executives in. We'll take care of all the back office stuff for you, which is pretty sweet. A lot of companies are figuring that stuff out for the first time, getting that stuff together. It's painful especially if you've never done it before. The demands on an early founder, that stuff takes a ton of time away from them. We'll just take care of that for you. We've got all that set up. And then finally, the goal is to provide at least almost like a SWAT team to do product development, getting early stage prototypes built, technical feasibility sorted out. I don't think we have the intention that we're going to necessarily build the entire product for our co-founder. That's what the $1 million is for, at least partly for. But we want to be able to rapidly accelerate that early feedback and work through iterations of product as we get started. This is a chart from Max Pog, who's a big writer in this space, just talking about how they fit together, because I think most of the people on this call are familiar with incubators and accelerators. And this is one way to think about it is startup studios or venture studios are starting at generally the earliest possible position. I mean, even before an accelerator is even appropriate in some cases, or even incubation is appropriate. It can start even earlier and will continue more or less through the point where it's well off and running. So if you think of this as something like this is the resources and people to really drive a company from here to here, but only when it fits a very specific profile. It's kind of a really exciting way to approach this. So Novy's brand new. Like we'll probably form our first company in early 2025. We've built a team of 6 that run the company today. It'll probably be a team of 15 by the end of 2025. But it's a really exciting project. We can choose a co-founder from anywhere in the world. Our team happens to be mostly in Iowa. We actually have one in Indiana and one in Minnesota. But our team is mostly virtual, but the core team is in Iowa. But excited to see where this fits and see in a few cases how it might fit with some of our university partners to build great companies.
That was awesome. Thanks, Eric. Very succinct. I want to jump right to pulling someone in. I want to pull in Alejandro from Cincinnati Children's. There you go.
Find, oh, thank you so much, Kathleen. Thank you, Eric, for the presentation. So I'm at Cincinnati Children's and I have a digital health portfolio of technologies. So I wanted to ask you, like, what key factors or opportunities do you look for on those early stage technologies from academic centers or medical academic centers?
Yeah. There's a couple of filters that we would use. I mean, first would be, what the potential of the business is. We're looking for things that have explosive potential. But interestingly, the economics of venture studio don't require unicorn outcomes. So we do have the ability to look at things that maybe a venture fund would maybe not consider big enough. There's a lot of math behind why that's true, but it's kind of an interesting possibility. The second would be whether it kind of hits the sweet spot of our team's expertise. As mentioned, my background is in selling things to software to hospitals. So if it's software that a hospital would buy, that'd be great. We have a lot of experience in the talent aspects of healthcare delivery. How do you find the talent, know the talent, vet the talent, and things like that. And then we have a lot in just sort of operational aspects of how healthcare is delivered. So it tends to not be things where there is a regulatory pathway. If it's something that has complicated clearances to deliver some sort of diagnostic tool, that's probably unlikely to be a fit, unless there's an acceleratable aspect of that, which wouldn't fit at least right now, the timeline for what we're after. We're looking for things that are generally going to have the mathematical characteristics of SaaS, meaning high gross margin kinds of products that can scale very, very aggressively given resources. And then we're going to look for things where, given the assets that Novy can provide, is it sufficient to get it from more or less founding to meaningful revenue and potentially Series A on, our combined package is something like $2.25 million between the direct cash and all the other stuff that we're doing. Like, is that roughly sufficient? And we have a bunch of other, Victor mentioned the programs in Indiana. We have a bunch in Iowa that we happen to be able to leverage, and we designed it to leverage those that are similar. So we can probably put together 4 million or so pretty easily. So something that's capital efficient enough to be able to get from wherever state they're in to meaningful revenue and arguably close to Series A on the money that we can bring is preferred, as opposed to something that takes 20 million just to get it to revenue. So
okay, great. And then additionally, if I can, so you mentioned that you take one company or invest in one company a year. So do you have like a all year round window for people to present ideas, or do we have like a specific time frame?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think we assumed initially it would be like, hey, here's our tight window, and you got to go from here to here to apply. I think we've landed on a spot where we're going to take applications year round, and then as the opportunities get evaluated, we might ebb and flow our timing for when we're evaluating them. But we can take the opportunities at any time, and it's a very simple application on our website just to get the process started on novyventures.com. Part of what we're doing right now is just getting those relationships built with, partners who maybe are obvious sources of, ideas, which is what most of the people on this call maybe would be part of why we're here, is building those relationships because it might solve a problem for you and for us at the same time. So
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much.
thank you for your questions.
Thanks, Alejandro. I had a question lined up, but Alejandro asked it. So I'm going to ask a couple other questions. How should startups get in touch with you? And, are you doing outreach of any kind? Are you open to talking to university tech transfer offices, et cetera?
Yeah, I have, so as you know, participated in the huddle a few weeks back. I have a whole list of people to follow up with. My colleague, David Tominski, who's on this call, and I are building those relationships out and starting to return those calls and get those connections made. But that is part of what we envision Novy to be is, academic partners are one obvious source of this, but also just hospitals, surgeons come up with cool ideas or nurses come up with cool ideas all the time. Or it could just be an organic founder who is, bumped into something, executive at a company or whatever it may be. They're all the same ultimate endpoint, which would be hit us up on LinkedIn or fill out the form on our website to just get the conversation started. We're starting to build those kinds of relationships out right now.
And what geography do you focus on? Are there limits to where you'll go?
There's not. For practical purposes, we have a Midwest tilt just because those are the relationships we already have, but there's no reason we couldn't work with someone from anywhere. But I think our focus is Midwest primarily right now because that's what we can meaningfully reach.
Okay, and I want to spotlight Nicole, who runs the tech transfer office at WashU.
Hey, Eric, thank you. So I have a question about the application on your website and what content you're looking for and level of detail that, are you requiring a pitch deck or can you speak to that?
Yeah, I think the thought was to make it as simple as possible. I don't want anybody to spill the secrets on a random website. They don't know who we are often when they're submitting it. So we keep it pretty light. I think we're looking for the broad characteristics of, what it is, what's the intellectual property, and then we'll follow up with a conversation before we get into detail. Generally speaking, I think most people are, when they're filling out that form, at least the ones we've had so far, a few hundred, I think, people are saying, well, I've got this idea, here's where I'm at. And most of them, it's pretty clear that it's probably not a fit. So we want to kind of make a conversation really quickly to say, this is, this smells regulatory to me. Here's what I think. If that's true, it's probably not a fit, for example. Yeah, we kept it pretty light, so it's fast. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Nicole. And now we've got Tim from Tim, can you show yourself? Midwest Research University Network has a question. Okay, he's not showing himself. I am going to ask another question. Oh, wait. Yes, he is. Okay. No, he isn't. You said you're going to do one startup a year, right?
Yep.
And it doesn't matter if they're in Iowa or not. You're kind of open to, okay.
They can be anywhere.
Give us, and can you talk a little more in detail about the types of company, give some examples of companies you'd love to work with. Oh, and here's Tom Dennison. Tom, do you have a question? You just spotlighted yourself. All right. Can you give some more specific examples of what would be an ideal company to work with?
Yeah, so in addition to the kind of criteria that I think maybe Alejandro asked about, we'll be looking for things like, is this somebody we want to work with, right? We've used this co-founding phrase, which is different from just investing, where we're writing a check and maybe we're on your board. Like co-founding means we're in the thick of it with our co-founder. So we kind of have to like each other. So that's like one of the things we're trying to filter for. But I think, we would love things that are going to have that digital health SaaS platform kind of thing, sold to hospitals, rapidly scalable. Since we're very new, I don't know if I have here's examples specifically, but we've looked at a bunch of things in the healthcare talent acquisition space recently. We do a lot of work in aging, happens to be something that my partners and I are all very interested in and have a bunch of background in. So technologies that make the aging process a little easier for people to manage their family members and communication kinds of things is something we've taken a lot of look at in the past. Those are pretty common. Yeah, so far.
Chris, you disappeared. Can you show yourself again? Chris had a question. Thank you, Chris. Sorry, I pulled you in before you were ready, I think.
We got it answered in the chat with a sure with an exclamation mark that Calgary, Canada is Midwest enough for Novy.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thanks for asking, Chris. Okay, so I think it's time to move to our breakout rooms. And thank you so much, Eric. It's awesome to see what you've got going on in Iowa and how
Thank
you're
you.
sharing it with the rest of the Midwest. So
Mhm.
thanks for taking the